Simon, your friend and mine, Gary Neville, has revealed that he'll be a pundit on the Qatari state channel BeIN Sports. 1 week after Gary has been highlighting and condemning the human rights issues and treatment of migrants in a documentary. Gary has made it clear in the film that he believes boycotting the tournament would be the wrong thing to do. He says, I don't believe that's the way change and progress happens, and the way in which nations like Qatar approach women and LGBTQ communities and their attitudes towards workers and human rights. And again, I refer to my learned friend Martin Samuel, chief sports writer in the Mail this morning. He says a lot of people believe Gary Neville is the worst kind of hypocrite for espousing socialist principles and then signing up to work for BeIN Sports, the broadcast arm of the Qatari state during the World Cup. They think this makes him a little different to his friend and Qatari mouthpiece, David Beckham. What do you think? Gary's doing that. He's speaking out about it, and he's asking some hard questions over in Qatar at this time, and yet has signed up to work, as Martin rightly says, for BeIN Sports, the broadcast arm of the Qatari state.
Well, you can run a variety of arguments. You can say, don't do as I do, do as I say. You can run the argument, if you can't beat them, join them. Or you can run the argument that Gary Neville might have the courage of his convictions and say the very things that he's saying for other broadcasters that give him an opportunity to advance his point because it carries favour with them, and say the same thing while he's doing it on BeIN's platform. When he doesn't say that, then we can land him with the prize tag of the biggest hypocrite that we have recently seen, and that's a long list of people that would fit that particular bill. He is a hypocrite. He talks about controls in football and brings Peter Lim over to run Salford and breaks salary management cap protocols. He is a hypocrite. He talks about, the players needing to understand there needs to be a reset in football whilst potentially advising the PFA that there should be no pay cuts to the players. He's a hypocrite. He talks about fans having to behave themselves whilst advocating for fans to mobilise and do things like they did at Manchester United. I am not for this World Cup. I'm also not for the West preaching to the Middle East. So whilst I'm not for this World Cup, we're going to go over there and we're going to broadcast shows from there. Does that make me a hypocrite because I'm not for something and I've said things about it? I've also balanced it up by saying it's not our gift to lecture other people in the world how they should operate in their societies because our Western values are different to theirs. Gary talks a lot of sense about a lot of things and a lot of nonsense about some other things. And in this instance, of course, he's going to be called a hypocrite because you know what you have to do? When you want to advance a cause and you want to be at the front of the queue for doing so, you have to invest some self-sacrifice in that. And no one wants to. Hummel don't want to. Sainsbury's don't want to when they're advertising the fact that we love pride while selling products to Saudi Arabian stores, which are probably one of the most discriminatory countries in the world towards LGBT issues. And Gary Neville doesn't want to. So let's stop with the lecture. Let's stop with the virtue signalling and just get on with the fact you're the same as everybody else. You have different views. They are conflicted at times. And what your primary view is, what am I in the business of? I'm in the business of Gary Neville.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
So he's going to be a pundit for the channel BeIN Sports. He says he'll raise awareness of human rights laws in his role with BeIN. Number one, can you see him doing that? Number two, if you were him, would you do that?
Well, look, I'm not working for a Qatari broadcaster. I'm going to be there myself. I'm going to be there with the BBC. I kind of blame FIFA for dragging us all to go and do a World Cup in this country. But you might want to look at, problems with Russia, South Africa, all the other countries we've been to. It's a shame, Jim, that we can't just talk about the football. And it's a sort of moral high ground. But, it does sound like Gary is trying to change everything and becomes... eventually he sounds like a hypocrite because, he's taking the money that they're offering. Imagine it's going to be big bucks for him to do that. But at the same time, he's against everything.
But his value set is different to the things he says.
Human rights issues.
Back in the day when you had a player in your dressing room like Ashley Cole that he alleges was being racially abused, he now talks about it 20 years later and says, because the climate is a different climate, I'll piggyback on the back of that one and say, I feel ashamed of myself. Why do you feel ashamed of yourself bleeding 20 years ago? You must have known it was wrong then. So let's stop this nonsense and see things for what they are. And there's nothing wrong. I admire people that put their head above the parapet. Yeah. Gary has views.
Yeah.
Now, whether these views are challengeable, he doesn't get challenged at Sky. Someone sent him a memo saying what Gary Neville says is unchallengeable. I happen to think a lot of it is absolute poppycock and needs to be debated.
So on this one, you think he should have sat at home?
I think you've got if you want to have strong views and you want to espouse those views to the strong views, you can't then do it by then saying, well, those I'll park those views because I'm going to get a big bag of money. You've got
the fact of the matter is, he'll be with me. Simon Jordan will be with me out there Martin, we will be talking about human rights laws and human rights issues out there. Because that's what we'll do. It's the nature of what we do. It's on our list of things we want to take off while we are there, of course.
100%.
And we'll talk to the people who have brought the World Cup to Qatar about those issues. We will not hesitate to do that. Will Gary raise awareness of human rights laws in his role with BeIN?
What he's saying he's going to. He wants
On the
to talk,
Qatari state channel, BeIN Sports.
He wants to develop and talk and work with these people to change their
He's there to
mindset.
comment on games. He's not going to break off from the left wing and just put a good ball in across to talk about migrant workers having suffered terrible fates, is he? Nonsense. He's getting paid a bag of money for doing football commentary, and that's fine. But leave off with the rest. If you want to have these views, then you've got to be able to back them up with some substance. And that's where he falls down.
Yeah.
And that's where he falls down.
Weeks ago, I was completely free to bring up LGBTQ rights, the fate of migrant workers, when I was sitting in front of the chief executive of Qatar 2022 World Cup Committee, Nasser Al-Khater, and he answered the questions. So it's not that they won't answer them, and we're free to ask them.
And I would say to him, I would absolutely categorically say to him, unequivocally, I think this is a bait and switch. I think you've got a World Cup that you pitched for in the summer and you've moved it to November. You've brought the World Cup into disrepute. I'd say it to him.
Of course.
I'd also drag Martin Samuel in front of him so Martin Samuel can have his views as well, because Martin Samuel's got a lot to say about that regime. But the bottom line is Gary gets a lot of airtime because Gary is very influential in people's minds.
Yeah.
And is a visible pundit. And that's a credit to him. And with that goes observation.
Right.
You know, and some of his views are very good and some of them are not. And in this instance, like Beckham, they're hypocrites. It's virtue signalling tripe. Beckham talks about LGBT issues and then signs up for a £150 million campaign for promoting Qatar.
Yeah.
And then they'll dress it up like Phil Mickelson and go, well, we're affecting change. No, you're not. You're affecting your bank balance.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.